Hello and welcome to Vera Voices. I'm Michael Jacobson, Vera's director. We're here today with Daniel Nagin, a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. Professor Nagin has written extensively on issues in criminal justice and criminology, as well as using statistics to analyze longitudinal data. But we're here today to talk about his most recent essay on whether crime and incarceration can both be reduced. So why don't we start with a broad take on your essay about whether you can reduce crime and incarceration at the same time. So maybe you can talk about what the answer to that is and why and how.
Sure. The answer to the question is yes, I believe we can reduce both crime and incarceration, but to do it, it's going to require a fundamental change in the way we use the resources of the criminal justice system to prevent crime. The key idea that animates our proposal is a simple point that a crime that is deterred or prevented doesn't have to be punished. And so specifically what we advocate is that as a country that we step back from these very long sentences, particularly of the mandatory minimum variety, and use the saved resources to shift them to making better and smarter use of the police to prevent crime so it doesn't have to be punished. And that's the way we think that we can reduce both crime and imprisonment.
So let's follow up on that for a moment, and specifically on the issue of police. But both because two things. One, we know from the research that there are things outside the criminal justice system that are also quite effective at reducing crime. Nurse-family partnerships, investments in early education, increasing the high school graduation rate. So one question is why the police specifically, and then the second thing I'd like you to address is that you can use police resources wisely under one administration, but that doesn't mean the next administration or the next police chief is going to continue to use them wisely. Why are you so confident that the wise use of police resources will continue over time?
As a nation, we're spending over $200 billion a year on running the criminal justice system. And more than 70 billion of that is being used for corrections. And so it's important to ask the question, when so much money is being spent, is it being used effectively? And our answer to that question is no, it's not being used effectively to prevent crime, and that we're overspending on prisons, and that some of the resources that could be saved by reducing our reliance on prison as a device for preventing crime could be effectively used in better policing. Now, the second part of your question is how can we be sure that those resources will be better used and will be wisely used by the police to prevent crime? And the answer to that is I can't offer any guarantee of that, but what we can do is vigilantly watch what the police are doing, ask whether the things that they're doing have demonstrated crime control effectiveness, and also it's important to ask that whether the things that they're doing are also not violating the civil rights of our citizens. So what we're emphasizing, or what we're advocating, is effective use of the police to prevent crime, not the use of the police to violate our civil rights.
Right. So let me take off on the civil rights point for a second, because being in New York, there are sort of two things that are apparent about New York, one of which goes right to the central point of your argument. New York has the fastest shrinking prison system in the country. It's reduced by 18% or so in the last 10 or 12 years, and by far the fastest shrinking jail system in the country. It's gone from 23,000 to about half of that, 12,000. And at the same time, crime, both on a state level and at a city level, not only has been reduced, I believe in both those cases we lead the country in crime decline. So obviously it can be done. On the city side, one of the issues that's a hot issue in New York City are those civil rights / NYPD issues. Because on the one hand, they'll say quite convincingly one of the things they do to drive down crime is by doing almost 700,000 stop and frisks, 60,000 marijuana arrests, keeping the streets hot. And although we don't know it from an empirical perspective, they make a good case that that is in fact what drives down crime. And it's clearly what's driven down the jail and prison population for a variety of reasons. So how, without commenting on whether those are sort of efficacious policies, do you run the risk of running into those very hot sort of civil rights issues that you really see playing out, and sometimes in a very toxic way in a place like New York City?
Well, Michael, I do want to challenge the issue of whether we know these methods are efficacious. There have been a number of studies, which I'm sure you're well aware of, that, for example, of concentrating police at high crime rate, at crime hotspots, has been demonstrated to be effective in reducing crime at those hotspots. But with regard to stop and frisk and arresting people for in possession of small amounts of marijuana, I don't know of any good well done studies that demonstrate that these methods are effective in preventing crime. And so I think that it's important that these kinds of tactics be evaluated. And to my knowledge, as I said, this one has not been evaluated with regard to its effectiveness in preventing crimes. But let me point out that suppose such a rigorous evaluation were done, and it were found that, at least under some circumstances, it were effective in preventing crime. When we think about these policies, it's important that we balance crime prevention benefits with civil liberties kinds of issues, because nobody wants to live in a low crime rate police state.
Let's assume for a moment that we can tell mayors or police chiefs, here are the policing strategies that would be effective both at driving down crime and reducing incarceration. And you want to reinvest the savings from the criminal justice system into doing that, which makes complete sense, and Vera works on a lot of issues. One of the interesting issues to think through that's not irrelevant here is that these are two completely different levels of government, right? So policing is local. In most of the money from changed policing practices and prevention that winds up saving money is going to be saving in prison systems. So there's savings to states right now that are dying fiscally. And you need states not only to reinvest some of that savings into smarter policing practices, but to take a step which they almost never make, which is to invest it not in their own state agencies, but essentially do some version of revenue sharing to give it to the locals on the theory that they will be the ultimate beneficiaries of it.
How are you going to go about making this transfer? How are you going to go about making sure, if the transfer occurs, that the police departments are using it in an effective fashion and not just buying more cruisers and that sort of thing? And those are great questions, and they're questions that much more attention needs to be given to by people in the academic community and the research community like Vera, to think of what are the transfer mechanisms that could be used, and what are the incentives that could be set up, and monitoring systems that could be set up so to ensure that these monies are used effectively.
It's a really interesting essay. I appreciate you coming here and talking about it. And I think one thing is pretty clear. I mean, the essay itself is not just interesting and thoughtful in and of itself, but it clearly will set off more research and more discussion. Because again, I think we do know to some extent, even if it's based on places like New York and New Jersey, and putting aside the reasons it may have happened, it's clear there are examples where incarceration has been reduced and crime has also been reduced. And I think your contribution to this ongoing discussion, especially at this time, is incredibly useful. And I thank you for coming here and talking about it.
Well, I thank you for inviting me. Thank you.